Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Applying Ethology webinar. I'm Laura Whalen, and together with Jen-Yan Chow, Christian Nowroth, and Sebastian Guman, we organize these webinars and the Animal Welfare Slack workspace. As we begin today, I want to remind you all to please turn off your camera and microphone. Should you have questions for our speaker, please type them into the chat box, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Katie Klassen from Purdue University in the US. Katie will share with us her research on the effect of farrowing crate enrichment on the welfare, behavior, and performance of sows and piglets. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Laura, for the kind introduction. And I also want to give a big thanks to the committee for inviting me to speak today. I'm excited to share my insight on my PhD dissertation research. And I wouldn't have been able to do this without the collaboration with Purdue University and the United States Department of Agriculture Livestock Behavior Unit. And I truly appreciate their support. So with that, let's dive into my webinar. So I like to start off by sharing some projected numbers for the year in the U.S. pork industry, as I believe this sets the stage well for understanding the importance of my research. So total 2025 commercial pork production is forecasted at 28.5 billion pounds, and that's a 2.6 increase from last year. And I believe the increase in pork production is largely driven by the sow farrowing projections, which provides insight into the scale of upcoming production. So from December of last year to May of this year, we're expecting about 5.9 million sows to farrow. And if you take the average piglet wean litter size, which is about 12, and you multiply that together, we're looking at almost 70 million piglets weaned in the first half of 2025. And a key factor that contributes to these numbers is the housing conditions for the sows and piglets. So in the United States, about over 90% of pork producers do use farrowing crates when housing sows and piglets. And one of the main reasons why producers do use farrowing crates, it does increase piglet mortality due to piglet crushing. Since sows are given an exact square footage, producers can house more sows, thus farrow more pigs. And since they are individually housed, the producers can monitor their health, their feed intake, as well as easier for the laborer to monitor and take care and handle the sows and piglets. However, there is some disadvantages to the farrowing crate system, as there is a rise in welfare concern from the public. That limited square footage does limit the sow's movement and behavior, so they can't stand up and turn around and do a full circle. They also are restricted to interact with the piglets, and consequently, this confinement can lead to agonistic and abnormal behaviors, which can lead to stress, frustration, and boredom. So there's a consequence to this. There is a growing pressure to adapt to the environment within the farrowing crate system that meets that societal standards of better welfare while maintaining production efficiency and cost effectiveness with the pork producers. So I truly believe that a missing piece to this, to connect these two viewpoints together, is environmental enrichment. So exactly what is environmental enrichment? It's referred to providing stimulation that supports both the biological and physiological need of the animal. And it can come in various types and forms, and there are benefits to giving them to the pigs, such as minimizing aggression and abnormal behavior, enhancing average daily gain. We see reduced fear response in new situations. And lastly, overall, we see an increase in activity level. So research on environmental enrichment for pigs has increased significantly over the past decade, but specifically when we examine environmental enrichment in the lactation phase with the use of farrowing crates is really scarce. In fact, less than 2% of the total publications from the last 10 years have focused using enrichments in farrowing crate systems. And despite the recognized importance of lactation phase for both the sows and piglets' welfare, there remains a gap in understanding which enrichment strategies are most effective in a fairing crate system. And I believe there are probably several factors why we aren't really seeing a lot of publications in the fairing crate system. One being the floor design. Here in the United States, our floors are slatted. So, that perfect example of using straw, there's a lot of benefit using straw as an enrichment. It just doesn't work well in our housing design and system as it can block the slurry system, which is a huge biosecurity concern. And also there's just limited space. So where's a good place to put these enrichments? So therefore, my research is to identify and optimize enrichment strategies, specifically for sows and piglets during the lactation phase in fairing crate systems. And I think this addresses both the welfare and practical challenges associated with these housing systems. So I have broken my research into two parts. Experiment 1 will focus on the lactation phase, and experiment 2 will focus on the nursery phase. So we'll start with lactation phase. We did this study in 2 reps, one in the springtime and one in the fall time in 2023. There was a total of 37 sows. The parity ranged from 1 to 8. And I also want to point out that when we divide them in the treatment groups, they were balanced by parity and genetic line. So there was a total of 449 suckling piglets, but out of those, we selected 4 focal piglets per litter. And those were 2 males and 2 females that were closest to the average birth litter weight. And so our experimental unit for sow is herself. And then for the suckling piglets, it was crate. The experiment period lasted 24 hours post moving the sows into the farrowing barn until the day of weaning. So here are the 3 treatment groups. The first is the control group, and as you can see, there's no enrichments in the farrowing crates. The next one is piglet enrich only. I will be referring to this as PE. This is where there are 2 enrichments away from the sow, about 2/3 back from her head, and again, only piglets had access to the enrichment. The third and final treatment group was the sow and piglet enriched, or I will be referring to that as SPE. This is where the enrichments are near the sow's head. And as you can see in the pictures, I have one that is sow level and one that is piglet level. And again, this is where both the sows and piglets have access to the enrichment. So the 2 type enrichments that I have chosen is based on a pilot study I did, and these 2 were the most engaged by the sows and piglets. So the one on the left is a porky play. These are commercially available. They are a hard antibacterial plastic material, and they're actually scented. So the ones that we used were apple scented. And then on the right, we have wooden blocks hung by silver rope. And I want to also point out that throughout the study, we adjusted the height as needed, and we also replaced as needed. So there were a lot of measurements that we took for this this research, but for the sake of time for this webinar, I'm only going to focus on a few. So I'm going to start with sow. The first, we began by continuously monitoring the duration of sow posture on 3 2-hour periods on day 1, 4, 7, 10, and 14 after farrowing. And these sow postures we looked at was lying lateral, lying ventral, sit, kneel, and stand. Additionally, we assessed the pressure sores of these sows using a modified welfare quality assessment protocol. So in addition of looking at that shoulder area, we also looked at the hock area as well. And we did this at 24 hours post moving the girls into the farrowing barn, 24 hours after implementing the treatment group, day 1, 4, 7, 10, 14, and 17 after farrowing. And now moving to the suckling piglets, we looked at their behaviors on day 1, 4, 7, 14 after birth. We did a 5-man scan sampling on the same 3 2-hour periods. In our ethogram, we had a total of 13 behaviors, but again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on 3. The first being pig directed. So this would be your tail biting, ear biting, belly nosing. Agonistic behavior, this would consider being fighting, chasing one another. And lastly, enrichment interaction. So this would be your SPE and PE group only. And this had to be direct engagement with the enrichment. We also looked at skin lesions on day 1, 4, 7, 10, and 14 after birth. We again modified the welfare quality assessment protocol. So we only looked at fresh skin lesions. We did not take into account the length and diameter of these lesions. And we looked at the 5 regions as I have illustrated here. We looked at ear, front, legs, middle, and hind quarter. And we had a scoring system. And so the higher the score, there were more lesions on that particular region. We also assessed tear staining as a welfare indicator for piglets, but before I get into how we collected this, I want to give a kind of brief overview of what tear staining is, as it's a fairly new marker for animal welfare. So tear staining occurs when the Harderian gland, which is located in that blue circle in the first picture, it produces called porphyrin. It's a reddish pigment, and under stress, these glands secrete higher levels of porphyrin, which results in a visible discharge. And as you can see in the last picture, it almost looks like red tears. And in pigs, this has gained a lot of attention as a potential welfare indicator in recent years, as larger tear stains has been linked to environmental stressors. So what we did is we took a picture of the piglet's left eye on day 1, 4, 7, 10, 14, and 17 after birth. And we analyzed looking at the cumulative area of those tear stains using ImageJ software. So I'm going to start by the results for sows. So as you can see, upon analyzing sow posture, we found no significant differences between the treatment groups. And then below is an odds ratio table presenting the likelihood of an event occurring. So in this case, it's the likely of scoring a 0, which is that ideal score. So that means no lesions on the shoulders or hock area. And this table shows it does help us quantify the differences between the treatment groups. So for the pressure sores, control cells had lower odds of receiving a score of 0 compared to the SPE sows. And there actually was a tendency for the PE sows to also have a lower odds of receiving a score of 0 compared to the SPE sows. So now we're going to go into the suckling piglets results. Here we have a bar graph with the proportion of time spent on the pig-directed behavior. Again, that's that tail biting, ear biting, belly nosing. And we can see that the SPE piglets perform less pig-directed behavior compared to the control and the PE piglets. And we also saw a control trending to perform more pig-directed behavior than the PE group. Next is agonistic behavior. So the enriched piglets, so both the PE and SPE group, exhibited significant reduced levels of agonistic behaviors in comparison to the control group. Here is a line graph showing the 2 enrichment treatment groups on time spent engaging with the enrichment. So the green line is our SPE group, and the blue line is the PE group. Values with the different letters indicate a significant difference among collection days within the same treatment group. And then the asterisk symbols represent a significant difference between the treatment groups on the same collection day. So if we can take a look at this line graph, we can see that by day 4, we can see significant differences in the fact that the SPE group does engage with the enrichments more than the PE group. I also do want to point out that with even both the PE and SPE group, we see increased use of enrichment by day. So this just shows that they were not losing interest of the enrichments during the lactation phase. And then for skin lesions, we did not analyze the middle, hind, or legs because over 95% of the piglets did receive a score of 0. So we'll be focusing on the ear, front, and overall score. We did find that the control piglets were less likely to receive a score of 0, which again is that ideal score. And that ideal score means less than 5% on the region. And so the control group was less likely to score 0 compared to the PE and SPE piglets on the ears, front, and overall score. So for tear staining, both the enriched treatment groups had smaller tear stains compared to the control group. So the overall conclusion for sow is that providing enrichment to that sow, so that would be the SPE group, did not affect the duration of each posture. However, we did notice that, the lack of enrichment, so the PE in the control group did increase the likely chance of developing pressure sores. And then the conclusion for suckling piglets is that environmental enrichment did reduce piglet direct and agonistic behaviors. And these findings were pretty consistent with the literature out there. And also the placement of the enrichment didn't affect the interaction with enrichments, with significant differences observed based on enrichment location. So we did see that the SPE group did indeed engage with the enrichment more than the PE group. Also, the environmental enrichments impacted the number of skin lesions on the ears, front, and the overall score. And we also noticed that piglets that had no enrichment, so that control group, had larger tear stains compared to the enriched groups. And now we're going to shift over from going from the lactation phase into the nursery phase. And I also want to, before I get into my experiment, I do want to point out kind of the driver and the reason why we should be looking into the weaning stage. There's a lot of things that are changing for that piglet. So for example, the piglets getting taken away from the sow. A lot of times they are transported, via truck from one location to another. And obviously that means there's a different housing facility. The temperature is going to get shifted. The diet's going to be changed from obviously that milk diet that the piglet was getting from the sow to a solid food diet. And then the social structure is going to get changed. A lot of times the piglets get regrouped with new conspecifics based on either gender and or the weight of the pig. So all of this can contribute to a lot of stressors to that piglet. And consequently, we can see increased aggression and pig-directed behavior. We may see decrease in daily weight gain, and we also may see weakened immune system. So for my study, experiment 2, it's just an extension from the first replication. So the reps stay the same, again, one in the springtime and one in the fall time. As I mentioned before, we did have 148 focal piglets. We did have to remove one from the study due to injury. And these the focal piglets were 4 per pin, and they were mixed within the treatment group based on weight. The experimental unit was pin, and the study lasted the day of weaning to 2 weeks post-weaning. So for our treatment groups, they're going to look pretty similar kind of with the lactation phase. So the control group obviously did not have any enrichment in their pin. But then with the PE and SPE group, they will look similar. The enrichments that we use for the lactation phase, we also use during the nursery phase. And those were located in the center of the pin. And with the measurements, again, will look pretty similar to the lactation phase. We use the same ethogram, 5-minute scan sampling on the same 3 2-hour periods, but we did this for the first 6 hours of when they got moved into the nursery, day 1, 7, and 14 post-weaning. Skin lesions, again, we took a look at those 5 regions. We only counted fresh skin lesions on day 1, 7, and 14. And again, the higher that score, the more lesions there were on that particular region. And again, we took pictures of the piglet's left eye on day 1, 7, and 14 post-weaning for tear staining. So here are the results for the piglets. Here is a table of the percentage of time each treatment group was performed a behavior. We did not find any significant difference in all the behaviors except for walking, which the SPE group exhibited higher levels of walking compared to the control group. We did not observe any significant difference in skin lesion scoring. However, when we analyzed tear staining, we actually saw similar patterns from the lactation phase in that both the enriched group, PE and SPE group, had smaller tear stain areas compared to the control group. So for the conclusion for the nursery piglets, majority of the behaviors, we did not see any differences except for walking. There was no differences between treatment groups for skin lesions, but when it came to that tear staining, we saw similar pattern with the lactation phase, and that both the enriched groups had smaller tear stains compared to the control group. So for our overall conclusion, providing environmental enrichment to suckling piglets did reduce some negative behaviors, as we saw with fewer instances of agonistic and pig-directed behavior. This decrease in aggression was further supported by fewer skin lesion counts in both the enriched groups compared to the control groups. Additionally, enriched piglets exhibited potentially lower stress levels indicated by the smaller tear stain areas. In the nursery phase, enrichment may create a more stimulating and comfortable environment, helping to alleviate some stress as we saw with the reduced tear stain areas. Our findings highlight the importance of strategic enrichment placement to improving the animal's welfare. When sows had access to enrichment, it helped reduce the development of pressure sores. And moreover, piglets that interacted with the enrichment alongside their mom were more engaged with the enrichment compared to piglets that only had access to the enrichment. And so with that, thank you all for taking your time and attend and listen to my presentation. I appreciate your interest in my topic, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Katie, for such a clear presentation with great photographs. And as Katie said, please feel free to add questions to the chat box. I have at least one to get us started, if that's okay. Though you found there was a relationship with pressure sores for the sows, the behaviors for the sows didn't seem to be different. So for the sow, do you think there's any way to make the farrowing crate an environment more accommodating of her behaviors? Or do we accept that the farrowing crate is going to be restricted for the sow and say that it is for a short period of time?
That's a really good question. So with the behavior of cells, we actually are still working on finishing the results of the behavior. But I will say I have a hypothesis that the sows that did not have the enrichments did perform probably more bar biting, jam chewing. We saw them, rooting on the ground more than the SPE group, but we haven't finished the results yet. I think another situation would be maybe better location of the enrichment. Again, it was on the side of the piglet, so maybe having some on the front above the feeder and having more dimension to those. Maybe she will, be more active, get up more, maybe will help with the welfare. Also, there is studies right now looking into kind of currently the first 3 days of the piglet's life is really critical. That's where we most likely see piglet crushing. So maybe another opportunity is maybe the design of the crate and the fact that that first 3 days keep her in that size, but maybe after day 3, maybe expanding that crate or maybe taking the crate out so that she can interact with the sows and perform more behaviors. But we just need more research on that.
Thanks, Katie.
Mhm.
The questions are coming in, so we'll hop over to the chat. Abby says, great presentation. Was there any evaluation of stereotypic or abnormal behaviors for sows? For example, bar biting.
Yeah, so kind of with the first question, I'm still analyzing that, but on our ethogram, we are looking at sham chewing, we are looking at bar biting, and then some other abnormal behaviors um, would be more like that consistent rooting on the ground. I know that's a natural behavior, but we have saw that it does damage that nose, and so we were also looking into that as well. But stay tuned for that for the results.
Webinar part 2.
Webinar part.
Jasmine says, do you know if tear staining is a method that can be used for other animals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I did a lot of research into looking at tear staining, it's been extensively done in laboratory animals, and that's actually where the first animals looking into tear staining is. I know it's been looked at into dogs because they also produce that perforin pigment. That's all the animals I've seen using that as a welfare indicator. But if the animals can produce, I think that'd be a unique opportunity to look more into it.
I have a follow-up question to that, if I can.
Yeah.
And those other species, was it young animals that they looked at the tear staining? I guess because you only followed especially the piglets in your first
Mhm.
study example, they were only 2 weeks old by the time you were done watching them, and they already had tear stains. Isn't that kind of amazing in a concerning way that they're already experiencing that level of stress?
Right. You hit it on the nail. It was amazing, but kind of terrifying to see that. So in the literature, I'm going to really focus on the pigs. Actually, our study was one of the first to look at piglets less than 2 weeks of age to see if they actually do develop tear stains. And again, shockingly, they do. A lot of the literature has looked at maybe like looked at during the nursery and the sows. I could probably have looked at the sow tier scene. That's probably one of my future directions, but with the limited time and help I received, and it is really hard to keep a sow's head still in a farrowing crate trying to take a picture. So it was easier to be able to hold the piglet and being able to take a picture of their eye. But for future references, I think it'd be pretty cool to see, with this study, how does the tear staining impact the sows?
Thanks for that. Katerina, I am wondering how often sows interacted with the enrichment. We did the similar study, but the sows rarely interacted with objects. And thank you so much for a clear talk.
Thank you. So again, we're watching the videos, and um, I will say over 90%, probably 95%, they were not using the enrichments. They were obviously really focused on nursing and resting and eating. That's kind of like their three main things they needed to do. But we did see a few instances obviously of engaging the enrichment, and it's really hard to say like the few seconds of interacting can or may not have made a difference in the pigs behavior, their stress level, their welfare. One of the neat things we did see when watching the behavior is, again, we did put the enrichment sow level and piglet level. But one of the actually cool things we did see is while they were nursing, they were actually engaging with those enrichments that were pig level. So we do see them using them as they are laying down too. But we further need to look more into that, and maybe those two enrichments maybe aren't the best enrichments. We still need to figure out, what would be a best enrichment for them in that kind of housing system.
Yeah, you from Yolanda. Great presentation, Katie. Do you have tail lesion data to review in your future analysis? One of your photos shows a dark spot on the piglet's tail, so I wondered if there was some early tail lesions that could reveal something about your treatments.
So yes, we did look at tail lesions, and so we scored them. If they had any lesions, it was a score of 1, and if there wasn't, it was a score of 0. Again, kind of similar to how we analyzed the hind leg and the back. We did more than 95% of them had a score of 0. And what we do here in the United States a lot of times is we do cut off part of the tail to minimize, that tail biting. But even did when I watched the videos, we did see instances of tail biting, but it obviously didn't reflect on the skin lesion scoring. But I did have to do a lot of modifications to that scoring system because a lot of tail lesion scores is for nursery pig size and older. So maybe another potential study would be kind of making a validated skin lesion scoring for not just the tail, but also for the body. But yeah, we did see some incidents, but not enough for any statistical differences.
Great. This one is from Jessica. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the nursery group had no significance in behavior difference across the treatments. So then, would you say the major reason is post-weaning stress? And if yes, how could it be tackled for the nursing group?
That's a really good question. So I will. answer that with a kind of my theory into why we didn't see any differences. And I think one of the big contributions is the stocking density. We only had those 4 focal piglets in a pen. When I calculated the area they were given almost 2.5 times the size they are recommended here in the United States. So if let's say maybe if we had total of 8, 10 piglets, I think we might have had maybe a more accurate representation of maybe how the behavior is influenced during that weaning stage. And so the fact that there was only 4, I think they were able to quickly establish hierarchy system. They were able to, easily run away and avoid the other pigs. There is more space. So I think that was a big reason why we didn't see any differences. So it is hard to answer that question because I think that was truly the reason why we didn't see any differences in during the nursery phase.
I will ask one more question in case somebody is still typing away. And that is, was there anything that was surprising in a good way that you didn't expect before you started your journey with this overall project?
Yeah, that's such a great question. The most surprising, I think one of the most surprising was the amount of engagement the piglets interacted with the enrichments. I was a little worried that they were going to get bored with the enrichments. But we saw with as I showed on that line graph, and I didn't show on the nursery, both the PE and SPE, they just kept increasing the use. So obviously they're liking it. I think too the fact that kind of one of the main reasons why I chose putting the enrichments by the sow is, in the wild, one of the ways that, they communicate with each other, sow and piglets, is through nose-to-nose contact. And if you watch, pigs being born and just interact them with a few hours in the fairing crate, they naturally do go up to the sow's head. So it's actually really neat to see them going up to the sow's head, but then we'll be like, oh, what is this? Almost, and actually start interacting with the enrichment. And I think too, what was surprising is my colleagues seeing like, oh my goodness, this enrichment actually works. Like every 2 seconds I turn and a piglet is interacting with the enrichment. So I think that was a good surprise feeling, knowing that these enrichments were being used.
Yeah, and isn't there just something really enriching about a baby animal just going to town with a toy?
It is.
Makes all of it worth it. Well, thank you, Katie, again for a lovely presentation and for sharing your results with us all. And wish you best of luck with the next steps of analyzing the last bits of
Thank
behavior.
you. Thank you. I appreciate again everyone for coming. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to contact me and I'm happy to talk about my project or anything about pig enrichment.